One aspect, I just want to briefly go over this, and we'll get into the concept of friendship, which I think is so important. But I just want to show you what happens when a relationship doesn't have all three roles at play at the same time. Obviously, we know if there's just one role that's being played. But for instance, if you're friends and partners, but you're not lovers, then you're just roommates. That's all you are. And by the way, whenever I say lovers here, that is not just sex. Now, we're going to talk a lot about sex, no doubt. But there are different seasons in life in which sex is not into play. But the issue here is intimacy. That's the key of what's taking place. Now, sex is an important part of that, and if you're in a certain age range and you're healthy and you're not having sex, you don't have intimacy. If everything else is going as it should. So if you should be having sex and you're not, intimacy is probably not there. And yet there are seasons of life in which sex is not possible. It's not an option. But if intimacy is there, you're still lovers. But whenever you take lovers away, you're just roommates. And there's nothing wrong with roommates. Chances are in college we had roommates. That's a great relationship. You're friends. There's a business side to what's going on, but there's no intimacy that's there. That's good in some relationships. It's horrible in marriage. Marriage needs this intimacy in the midst of it to have a healthy relationship, and so you need to be lovers. A lot of people, that's a threat for them whenever they have little kids. That's the danger. Is if you're not careful, you can just become roommates, and that's a dangerous spot to be in if it lasts for longer than a very short season. If you're friends and lovers, but there's no partnership, then you're just still dating. Which again, that's a great season of life. Dating is very important. But marriage, as we're going to see in just a little bit, marriage is also a business decision. There's a partnership aspect that is actually there. And if you don't have that, then you're just pretending to have gone into a different season when you're really not. You're still dating. And then if you're partners and lovers, but there's no friendship, then you're just Pretty Woman. I mean, basically, there's a transaction that's happening there. Y'all saw that, right? No, you didn't see that. Okay. There's just a professional relationship that's there, and that's not the way marriage is meant to be. Marriage is supposed to flow now from friendship. So I want you just kind of in your own hearts and your own minds right now. Hey, Kevin, I'm sorry. You don't have to do that now. That's for tomorrow.
What about me? Can I stop too?
Hey, Jay, I'm sorry. I miscommunicated. Tomorrow I want them to have note cards, but they don't have to have them now. But you can have note cards if you want. Tomorrow at the end, we're going to spend probably the last 30 minutes tomorrow answering questions. We're going to do a Q&A, but I don't want you to feel the pressure of having to ask the question to me live in the room and then have everybody think that, oh, well, now we know what their problem is. And so what we're going to do tomorrow is you'll just be able to write down the question, and everybody will write down something, even if you just write down, I'm pretending to participate. Everybody will write down something, then we'll pick those up, and I'll answer all the questions from there. I'm sorry, I miscommunicated about that. But I want you to think in your own mind right now, in which of these areas, friends, partners, lovers, in which of these areas is your marriage the strongest? Just think about it. Which one? That's good. Everybody has a strength. That's good. What is yours? In this season of life, where are you? And then secondly, in which area do you think you need the most work? These things need to be generally balanced. They're gonna have different flows during different seasons. They're gonna be generally balanced. But which one at this moment needs work? And then beyond that, what could your relationship be like if you played all three of these roles well? There's a potential out there, I think, for your relationship that maybe you haven't even begun to see. In part, it's possible that one of these roles you just weren't aware of. You never maybe thought that you're supposed to be a partner to your spouse, even though that's a word that's often used. You might have never thought about that. It can now change everything. Eugene and Joanne were the longest married couple we had in our church. They were married 70 years. And one day they dropped by the office, and they lived very close. And they never had any children. She had some church background. He hadn't. He had been in the Navy. The first time he ever went to a church, he was in the 70s. He came to know Christ at our church in the 70s. It's the coolest story we could possibly have. They were just a great couple. They never had any kids, and so in many ways they kind of adopted some of us there as their grandchildren. And so they came by the office one day and they made some pumpkin bread. And they came in, they sat down. Of course, by this time in their life, it was difficult just to get from the car into the office, and they sat down kind of exhausted, and we began to talk, and we chatted back and forth and laughed, and everything was great until eventually Mr. Eugene looked at Miss Joanne and said, "Well, are you going to give him the bread?" And she goes, "I don't have it. Don't you have it?" And he goes, "I thought you got it." And I just kind of sat back and watched these two 90-year-olds begin to squabble back and forth between them. And so finally she said, "Fine, I'll go get it," because she was kind of the more able body of the pair. And so she went back out, got in the car, and drove the 3 blocks to get the pumpkin bread to bring it back to me, not knowing that I didn't eat it at the time, but I faked it. And so while she was gone, I had a chance just to talk to Mr. Eugene. And I said, "Mr. Eugene, what's the key to being married 70 years? And he said, "Tell her every day that you love her." I thought, well, that's a great line, right? That's good. So she came back in, brought the bread. I thanked her for it. She sat back down. I said, "Miss Joanne, what's the key to being married 70 years? She said, "Tell him every day that you love him." How cool is that? That is so cool. A few months went by, and Mr. Eugene got bad in health, and they put him in hospice. And one day I went by there, and he was all alone, all by himself. And I walked in. We had a great conversation. And as we were talking along, I recounted that story. And I said, "Mr. Eugene, is that really the key to being married 70 years? He said, "Yep, memorize her answers." Thought that's pretty good. Whenever I think about Eugene and Joanne, they were friends. You could tell. Now, I met them at a unique time in their life. Their health was failing. And yet at the same time, I think I met them in part at the crowning moment of their life, because everything was put in perspective. Everything that they knew about life was now put in this perspective. And whenever I think about them, they were friends. And whenever I think about that, that's the kind of relationship I want with my wife. At the very foundation of a healthy marriage is friendship. It's the place that you're supposed to build everything from. I laugh hysterically, I mean kindly and pastorally, but hysterically, whenever one of our church members comes to me and says, "Well, we can't date, we're too good of friends." That's who you're supposed to date. Now, if he's ugly to you, then just be honest. Stop saying you're too good of friends. Just say, "I don't like how he looks." Right? But don't blame the friendship. Because at the very foundation, is that too honest? I'm sorry. It's true. At the very foundation of a healthy marriage is friendship. Isn't this how dating starts? This is what dating is all about. You're just trying to figure out, do I like this person or not? Can I hang out with this person? And so that's why we go to the movies. That's why we go to dinner. And the basic question, I mean, the very fact that you got asked out to begin with means that there's some attraction that's there, at least some, right? But the first question we want to figure out is, do I like this person or not? The very basic concept of a healthy marriage is this idea of friendship. And it's a friendship much like other relationships that we have, and yet it should become a very unique relationship as well. And so one of the great things about friendship, and specifically within marriage, is that marriage is this place in which good is present. But the experience of good is one thing when it's done in isolation. Do you know that you rarely laugh alone? Rarely. Very rarely do you laugh alone. And whenever you do laugh alone, chances are you're thinking about something else when other people were around. Good is good in and of itself, but good is meant to be shared. And as we share it, as we experience it together, it then has this multiplying effect. And so good is multiplied when experienced with others. It becomes better. It becomes better when it's then shared with somebody else. And so one of the most important things, I think, whenever it comes to building within the friendship quadrant, not quadrant because there's only 3, what would that be? Triangular? I don't know. I'm going to move on from my illustration. I think one of the most important things about building this aspect of friendship within marriage is to up the quantity and the quality of the good that we actually experience. Now, one of the greatest misperceptions, I think, about a healthy marriage, many people believe that a healthy marriage has less negative interactions, that's what makes them good. But it's not true. A healthy marriage still has negative interactions. People in this room can testify to it. A healthy marriage still has negative interactions. The difference is those negative interactions happen within the context of a lot of good interactions. Whereas an unhealthy relationship has those exact same negative interactions, but they have no good interactions to offset it. So those negative interactions now become heightened. As a matter of fact, whenever a relationship goes really bad, the only interactions that a couple has are bad. And the next thing you know, the whole relationship is defined in a negative way. One of the best things you can do to improve your marriage right now is to increase the number of positive interactions you and your spouse have on a regular basis. With intention. Remember our word, intention. To intentionally develop and to nourish positive relationships, positive concepts, times in which you laugh, times in which you rejoice. One of the things I often tell couples whenever they come into my office and maybe they're having a problem, I've set them up with a counselor. Now it's going to be a week before they can deal with this. One of the things I often tell them is, okay, if you need to talk about this negative issue, you can talk about it. But my encouragement to you would be on the way home, don't discuss it. Instead, on the way home, I want you to recount the reason y'all fell in love. Recount it. Remember. Remind yourself of what was your favorite date ever. Where's your favorite place you've ever taken a vacation? What's your favorite moment you remember with your spouse? On your way home, do that. I've had couples get home and call me and say, Kevin, we just had the best discussion we've had in years. Why? They are intentionally now creating a positive bond with one another. Now, to have this happen, we have to see the good. You have to see it. There's a perspective that's now there. When a relationship goes bad, often they put on negative lenses and everything they see is then negative. One of the most important things that you need to do for your spouse and with your spouse is you need to fixate on their good qualities. You do this when you're dating. This is how a relationship starts. Whenever you're dating, you fixate on the good qualities. You oversee the bad. You don't even see it. Matter of fact, you begin to think the bad qualities are good. You think they're cute, right? And they were cute. And now 20 years later, they're not so cute anymore, right? But whenever you're dating, you fixate on the good, and that begins to color how you see the bad. Now, I don't think we should live in denial. By any means, I don't think we should live in denial. But I do think when a marriage goes bad, a spouse begins to scan the horizon for anything negative in their spouse. And they find it, and they point it out, and they fixate on it, which causes them to have a negative lens, which means they begin to see more things in a negative light, which means they fixate even more on more negative, and it becomes like a ball rolling downhill. In a healthy relationship, those negative things are still there, but they're seen through the lens of a positive light, in which I'm far more focused on what my spouse does right than what they do wrong. I'm far more focused on the good qualities than the bad qualities. Now, I'm not saying at this moment, if your spouse is having an affair, well, just put on positive lenses as you look at that. I'm not saying that. We got to deal with those problems. But what I am saying is in the small things of life, and as John Gottman says, there are some big things in the small things. In the small things of life, fixate on the good, on the positive attributes that are there, the positive aspects that are there. And so we have to see the good, but then we also have to share the good. So good is meant to be shared, right? It's meant to be expressed. I'll never forget... I'm going to tell a lot of stories about my grandparents because to me they're the models whenever I think about healthy marriage and healthy relationship. I'll never forget. I'm driving my grandfather to the hospital to see his wife for the last time. Right? She's in hospice, dying. She's 90. It was 4 years ago. Yes, 2 days ago. And so we're driving to the hospital, and it's right at dusk. He's of very bad health, but we're going to find a way to get him in the room one last time. Right? And whenever I'm driving with my papa, I just immediately slow down 20 miles. Right? I just can't help it. Like suddenly I'm a country guy driving his truck, and I just drive slow. I'm waving at everybody, right? Just what happens when Papa's in the car. It's what you do. And so we're driving down this road. Sun is setting. It's February. It's cold, but it's a beautiful sunset over into Oklahoma. We're driving down the road in silence. I don't know what to say. They've been married 70 years. I don't know what to say. We're driving down the road. My grandfather goes, "Man, what a beautiful sunset." I thought, how did he see that? I don't get that. How did you see that? I mean, I see it now. Now that you pointed out, I see it. But your life is falling apart. And yet he still had the ability in the midst of the sorrow, and he wasn't overlooking the sorrow, but he still had the ability in the midst of the sorrow to still see the good. You want to know why they were married 70 years? Because they had that ability. They could still see it. And whenever they saw it, they shared it. They didn't just bottle it up and keep it to themselves. They shared it. Now, the great threat with us within our relationships is even if we have the ability to see the good, if we're not very careful, we share it with our friend, with our coworker, with a stranger, with Facebook, but we don't share it with our spouse. You know, there's something very powerful in the first telling of something. In the first telling. I don't know if you ever noticed this. The first time you tell it, there's an excitement, there's a joy, I don't even know how to communicate it properly. But after you've told something enough times, it begins to become a canned speech. It doesn't make it false or wrong or anything like that. In some ways it can be perfected, no doubt. But there's an emotional disconnect, right? I mean, I just told a story about the day my grandmother died. No tears. Nothing. It's just a story. It's a story I tell in the marriage retreat. It's just a story, right? Why? Because I've told it so many times. The first time I ever told that story, it broke me, right? There's something different about the first telling. You know, a very basic problem with many couples is their spouse is no longer their first person. Something good happens, they call a friend. Something bad happens, they call a friend. Something takes place in their life, they mention it to a coworker. There are some things that you just need to save for your spouse, and then you can tell whomever. But your spouse deserves the first telling. And as that happens, specifically within the good, as that happens, there is now an emotional connection that begins to take place. Whenever something good happens, the first thing you should think of is, I can't wait to share that with my spouse. That's why you should be quick to pick up the cell phone, quick to text, only at the stoplight, quick to do those kind of things to say, have you seen the sunset? Hey, did you see this story? Did you watch this news? To share that now in a positive way. For us to increase the number of positive experiences that we have with our spouse, we have to see it. We have to have a perspective that allows us to see it. That's our own personal choice. But then we have to share it, but we have to share it with them. It doesn't diminish what we tell our friends or anything like that. It just means that Jay gets the second telling, Jenny gets the first. That's all it means. That's not going to hurt Jay's feelings at all. He doesn't have any emotions anyway, right? Doesn't care. But that's going to connect us in a deep way. Whereas if I'm not careful, I can share my entire life with everybody. And by the time I get home at night to see Jenny, I'm bored with it. I got nothing left. And then she is getting either the worst of me or she is getting none of me. And if you're not very careful, if both couples begin to do that, then you no longer have these positive interactions, these positive relationships. The friendship begins to die. And the person that used to be your first person becomes your second person, eventually becomes no person at all, as your lives just drift slowly apart. Well, how is friendship built? Friendship is built through shared attention. Shared attention. I got a great illustration, I think, of how this happens. One night, Jenny was gone. She was working. Maybe she was out of town, but she was working. And as she was gone, right, it was my night to cook. And so we went to McDonald's. Me and the kids, we went to McDonald's because that's what makes me a great dad, and that's why they love me, because they love McDonald's, and so do I, because I eat like a 5-year-old, right? And so we go to McDonald's. And we get there and we sit down at a back table, and over to the side there's this couple, and they're reading the newspaper. And I don't know how this couple is. My perspective, they're retired. That's about kind of where they are, right? And so I'm just sitting there, and the kids are eating, and they're getting stuff everywhere, and I'm kind of skimming through Twitter at the same time. But I start looking at this couple, and it was kind of fascinating to me. Because they were reading the newspaper, and here's what would happen. They'd be reading the newspaper. And then he'd go, hey, did you see this? And she'd lower her newspaper, and she'd look at it and go, no, what? Oh, yeah. And then they talk. And then they go back to read the newspaper. And then she'd reach out and say, hey, what's this word here? And she's working the crossword. And so they're looking, they're talking, and oh, yeah, that's it. And then they tell a story, and they go back to read the newspaper. And then they put the paper down. And I watched this for 20 minutes, and they interacted constantly, and I wanted to shout, this is how marriage works. This is it. Friendship is we live life together, right? We're going through life together, and life is coming at us at every time. But it's built on shared experience, which means I'm living my life, Jenny's living her life. There are some things we experience together because we are together. This is something we're experiencing together tonight, right? From drastically different perspectives, right? But we're experiencing this together. But she goes off to work, I go off to work, we live our days. We're walking side by side through life, but there's some things I experience alone, some things she experienced alone, some things we experience together. But on the things that we experience alone, friendship is built on shared experience, which means as we're living life, we have to constantly be intersecting with one another. So I experience this, and then I bring it back to her. And then I experience this, and I bring it back to her. And she experienced that, and she brings it back to me. And she experienced that, and she brings it back to me. And so we're constantly weaving back and forth, out by ourselves, and then together. And then out by ourselves, and then together. So I'm reading my paper by myself, then I'm sharing it with my spouse. Then I'm reading together, then I'm sharing it with my spouse. Friendship at its best is this constant weaving back and forth in which you are communicating with one another about what is going on within your life. John Gottman, who is kind of the leading marriage expert these days, calls these bids. That whenever I set my newspaper down and I say, hey, did you see this? I'm making now a bid for your attention. A bid. I'm saying, hey, will you pay attention to me? Right? And in that moment, you have a choice. You can say yes or no. And if you say yes, we engage. If you say no, we don't. Do you see where a good marriage goes and where a bad marriage goes? In a good marriage, as one spouse makes a bid at the attention of another spouse, 8 out of 10 times that spouse will respond in a positive way. Now, you can't be 10 for 10. It's impossible. If I come home from work and I want to share something with Jenny that I'm really excited about, and she's my first person, I've saved something for her, and I say, hey, Jenny, let me tell you about my day. And she's in the middle of cooking dinner, and Silas is doing his homework, and Ella's in timeout, right? If that's the theme. And so if that's happening, Jenny can't immediately go, oh, shut everything off. Daddy has spoken. What is it? She can't do it, right? And so there are times in life in which it just isn't going to happen. It just can't, right? And so Jenny comes to me and she needs to talk to me in that moment, and there's 5 seconds left on the clock. There's just some times where you can't talk. All right, you can hit DVR. That's a whole different story. But there are sometimes you can't be 100%. But healthy couples appreciate, acknowledge, and accept the bid of their spouse at least 8 out of 10 times. Unhealthy couples only do it 4 times. So what does that mean? That means 6 out of 10 times in an unhealthy relationship, when one spouse says, hey, did you hear? Hey, did you see? Hey, what do you think about this? The other spouse shuts them down. That means a majority of the time, when they make a bid for their partner's attention, the other spouse says no. Well, what happens? Well, as you get told no, you stop making as many bids. But that ratio doesn't change. So now I'm not making as many bids, and yet I'm still getting rejected just as much, to where eventually I think my spouse doesn't care anymore. So in a healthy relationship, a couple is constantly weaving back and forth, interacting in every way. Have you ever noticed? Have you ever been walking along the beach and you see the sunset and how that's just meant to be shared with somebody? You just almost can't help yourself but to say, look at that, the beauty of life. We're driving in tonight or this afternoon, and Jenny says, look at these barns. They're beautiful. Barns don't look like that in Arkansas. I mean, we got barns. Not like this. They were beautiful to her. She said, look at these churches. They're beautiful. I wouldn't want to pastor most of them, but they're beautiful, right? Personal joke. It's meant to be shared. Good is meant to be shared. In a healthy relationship, one spouse is constantly making a bid on the other spouse's attention, and as that happens, they have a positive interaction. Now notice this. The negative interactions are going to happen. You're going to fight over the kids. You're going to have tension over sex. You're going to have frustrations with money. That is guaranteed. You almost can't avoid it. Almost don't even need to avoid it. But how many positive interactions you have is solely your choice. Solely your choice. And the more positive interactions you have, the less powerful these negative interactions will be. We will literally pull the power out from underneath them because they're just one instance in the midst of 20 interactions in a day. And yet, if we stop having positive interactions, the negative are guaranteed, our relationship can turn sour very, very quickly. In order to build a friendship within a relationship, you need to, one, be making bids toward your spouse, but then also recognizing it and accepting bids from your spouse. Accepting it. And here's the thing. You have to turn down your spouse on occasion. You have to because of life. But at least recognize, anytime you say, I don't want to talk about that right now, that's not important to me, or why do you only care about that? Anytime you do that, in that moment, you are not turning down the topic, you're turning down the person. Right? I have a habit. I don't know what it is. I'm watching football games. A major injury happens, right? Somebody breaks their leg. I'll pause it. Hey, Jenny, look at this. Right? She doesn't want to look at it. She does. She hates it. Right? And I can't, somebody has to see this. Right? And she will calculate in that moment, I don't care. I'm going to turn you down, Kevin, as a person. Right? I don't want to see the injury. Right? That's fine. But in that moment, what I'm doing in that moment is not saying, hey, look at the injury. I'm saying, hey, look at me. Connect with me, right? Now, over time, I have to learn. That's not a good place for her to connect with me. And so I can't do it. So what do? I pause it. I take a picture of it. I put it on Twitter. And I say, hey, look at this. And then my buddies start tweeting back and forth, right? And so on injuries, they are my first people, not Jenny. But then on everything else, it's her, right? Anytime your wife wants to hear about your day or tell you about her day, in that moment, that is not an invitation for you to hear about her day. That is an invitation for you to hear about her heart. And you better be careful if you're turning that down. You better be careful if she catches you basically turned off in that moment. Because that is not a definition now about her day. That is a definition about her life. Healthy couples receive these bids. They make the bids. They receive the bids. Healthy couples literally, continually lead and live the paper of life, and they put it down and they say, hey, look at this. And then they go back, and then they look at this. Now the prerequisite for friendship is time. You got to have it. You got to have it. And people say, well, it's just about having quality time. You're right. And you want to know how you have quality time? You have a bunch of quantity time. That's how you have it. And eventually the quality time will come. If you have quantity, eventually the quality will actually come. Now, depending on your season of life, Jenny and I have 2 small kids. She has her own business. I have the church. We have busy lives. So you do not have to spend time together every day. I'm not saying that. It's not even possible at our stage of life. Now for some of you at your stage of life, it is. And so if you're young and married and no kids, yeah, you have more time for friendship. But do not at this stage begin to get in the habit of not spending time with your spouse. You need to be spending a bunch of quantity time with your spouse. Because a day is going to come, if you do have kids, that time is going to shrink. Now, if you're at a later part in life, this is one of the great thrills of marriage, I think. What I've seen in successful marriages is once you get through that phase of raising kids, is the good news is that more time is going to come. And then whenever it's there, you get to spend time together. But if you're kind of in the season of life that Jenny and I are in, don't get in this concept of that you have to spend time together every single day. It just can't happen. It's not where we are. But the point number 2, you do have to spend time together on a regular basis. You have to find a way. You have to cut it out. And there are ways to do this. This in part, and if you need more information on this stuff, you can always Google me, but this is in part why you shouldn't have a television in your bedroom, generally speaking. Now, if you can find a way to live it, you live it. But one reason Jenny and I don't have a television in our bedroom is because a marriage counselor, before we got married, said don't put a TV in your bedroom. It's dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is because the best time we have on most days is the 5 minutes before she or I fall asleep. It's the only time we have to communicate. And we fall exhausted into bed, right? We cuddle with one another, and we can just in that short period of time kind of talk through some things. And sometimes that's all we got in the day. You know what? That's a lot. And to now throw that away for a ball game, to throw that away for Fallon, to throw that away for something else is just not worth it. You got to find a way to make it happen on a regular basis. Not every day. It's not going to happen. but on a regular basis. Some couples will say this is how date night is so important to them. I would say for us, this is why vacations are so important for us. Finding ways to get away from the stresses of business, of church life, of all those things. But you have to find a way to connect. One thing that I found, Jenny now works from home. One thing that I found is if I'm out having lunch, I can swing by the house, and we can actually get 5 minutes of conversation, just us, and there's no kids running around, right? You find a way to make it work. Maybe you call every day. Maybe you check in every day. Maybe you text one another. You just find a way. Find your time, and you can make it work. Because here's the thing. It's a powerful thing, I think. Your affections will commonly follow your investments. And so if you intentionally invest time in your spouse, your love will grow. It'll happen without a shadow of a doubt. If you doubt this, then do this. On Monday, you go to the bank and you borrow $10,000. And then you get on E-Trade and you buy a stock that you've never heard of in your entire life in an industry that you know nothing about. And then on Tuesday, you know what's going to happen? You're going to hear something about that industry and it's going to pique your interest. Why? Because you're invested. You never even thought about the industry. But the next thing you know, now you're thinking about how the price of oil affects that industry. You've never thought about that stock. But the next thing you know, if you hear anything close to it, if you see a license plate that has something close to the ticker, you're going to be thinking about it because you're invested now in it. If you will invest in your spouse, your affections will follow that. People often get confused in that. They'll come to me, and without doubt, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, we just don't love each other anymore. Well, it's because you're not investing in each other anymore. If you will invest in one another, then your affections will follow that. If in part, if you love your spouse less today than you have in the past, that to me, most of the time, that to me is more of a reflection of how much you've invested in them more than what they have or have not done. That defines you more than it does them. How much you love your spouse, generally speaking, defines you more than it defines them. It defines your heart. If you are investing in them, this is why whenever you have a rub with somebody, your pastor will tell you pray for them. And what happens? You get more empathy for them. You've experienced that, right? You got somebody you just don't like very much, and you're like, good grief, I know this is wrong. I'm supposed to do something about it. And you hear somebody says, well, pray for them every day. Like, all right, Lord, smite them. Well, that's not quite what that means, right? And so, all right, Lord, let them see what they've done wrong. All right, Lord, let them, and then eventually you begin to pray good prayers of, Lord, let me see them the way you see them. And the next thing you know, that anger diminishes. And before long, the empathy rises. What's happened? You've invested in them in that moment. As you invest in somebody, your affections begin to follow. I think this is an important point too. It's kind of an abstract on the midst of this concept of friendship, that your spouse should be your best friend. I truly believe that your spouse should be your best friend, but not your only friend. Your spouse does not have to be your only friend. As a matter of fact, your spouse shouldn't be your only friend. You can't expect your spouse to play that role. If you need more information on that, you can go to the blog. But we're getting short on time here, so I'm gonna hurry up a little bit. Now, here are 3 overlooked aspects of friendship. 3 things that I think we overlook that are important to us. First of all, friends suffer well. They suffer well. Several years ago, I wrote an article on the concept of what I call the most overlooked aspect of who you want to marry. And what I said in there is you want to pick somebody that you want holding your hand when the doctor says you have cancer. That's who you want to pick. Where that article came from were 2 situations within our church that happened almost simultaneously, in which one woman got diagnosed with cancer and her husband divorced her. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. At the same time, this other woman got diagnosed with cancer, and her husband literally walked beside her every single day of her life until she died. 7 years. And he served her in a way that was unimaginable. Whenever you say I do, you're picking somebody now that's going to walk with you through the toughest parts of life. If you will build your friendship, that means when the tough moments come, you will have somebody right by your side. Somebody who will love you well, who will suffer alongside of you, who will let you know, even in the midst of a bad diagnosis, a horrible grief, a terrible sorrow, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. One of the great gifts of marriage, one of the great gifts of friendship now is you don't have to suffer by yourself. But then friends also play well. They play well. One of the great tests, I think, of kind of the state of your relationship today is how much playfulness is in your relationship. Now, guys, be careful here. I'm not talking about making fun of your wife. Don't make fun of your wife. Ever don't make fun of your wife. This is about having fun with your wife. This is about enjoying experiences together, doing things together, being playful, back and forth. We know things about one another that nobody else knows. And we know what we can joke about. We also know what we can't joke about, right? And sometimes we might cross the line. We'll have to say, hey, does that hurt you? I'm sorry. I won't do that anymore. And to honor that, not to do it anymore. But Jenny can joke with me in ways that nobody else can. There's a playfulness that's there. It's one of the great joys of friendship. And then finally, whenever you develop friendship totally, friends are grateful. There's a gratitude about friendship. I'll never forget Jenny and I. It was, I can't remember if it was her birthday or anniversary, but we were in Birmingham. We had just gotten married in June, and I think it must have been her birthday, or maybe it was a year later, but one of the two. And so it was either going to be our first anniversary or our first birthday after we got married. And a buddy of mine, we were living in Birmingham. A buddy of mine from Phoenix called me and said, "Hey, can you play in this golf tournament with us?" It was the Auntie Anne's corporate golf tournament. Every year he got last. And so he said, hey, I'm going to hire you as the chaplain because you have to work for the company to play in this golf tournament. I'm going to hire you as the chaplain for my company and fly you up to Philadelphia to play in this golf tournament. I said, okay, I'd love to. I said, when is it? And he told me the date. And I said, well, I got a problem. I said, let's just say birthday. That's Jenny's birthday. I was supposed to fly back on. I said, let me ask her, rookie. I said, let me ask her, see what she says. And so I called her up, and Jenny comes from a background, again, very low maintenance, right? Whenever I tell guys who you want to marry somebody who's highly motivated and low maintenance, right? That's what Jenny is. Very low maintenance. And in her family, you celebrated just whenever. Dates didn't matter. And so it doesn't matter. And so she said, oh, yeah, you go. You'll have a great time. And I didn't, because of how we work our relationship, I didn't in that moment go, now did she really, is this like a test? You know, is she saying you go, and what she's really saying, yeah, if you go, I'm going to divorce you? Like, we don't do that. We take each other out at their word, right? And so if she said go, I can go. And so I called him. I said, hey, I'm good to go. As long as I can just get back, take her to dinner, that'd be great. He said, oh, no problem. And so he bought me a flight, but he bought me a flight out of Atlanta because he doesn't own a Globe. And so I flew from Atlanta to Philadelphia, right? And so I played in this golf tournament, and we won, which he had never done before, and it was great. I actually almost hit a hole-in-one to win a car, and he offered to pay the tax for me if that were to happen. It was a great experience, right? And so we rushed back to the Philadelphia airport, and on the way back, it's not a direct flight. I'm going Philly to Newark to Atlanta. Only makes sense, right? And so I fly from Philly to Newark, and whenever we get into Newark, it's very foggy, unbelievably foggy. This is the day John F. Kennedy Jr. died, flying out of Newark Airport, right? And so it's very foggy, and we land, and our flight gets canceled. And so I go up to the ticket agent and say, all right, the flight's been canceled. Here are the 5 flights that are following it. And she says, you're not getting home today. And I am a pastor, and I know how to work people. And so I said, with tears in my eyes, this is my wife's birthday, and I've been up here on a business venture because I'm the chaplain for this company. But I promised her I'd take her to dinner tonight. I need to get home. And that ticket agent had so much compassion when she looked at me and said, you're not getting home tonight. You're getting home tomorrow. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? I said, can I fly standby? And she said, honey, look at that wall. And all along the wall were people that were flying standby. And they all had flown before. And so they had credit or points. They were members of things. They could go into places I couldn't go. I'd never really flown. So I didn't know what to do. So I just went over there and sat down. I just waited. And the next flight began to board, and everything was going. I knew I wasn't going to get on that one. That was no point. And right as they were about to shut the door comes open, and a flight attendant, which I had never seen since, a flight attendant came up and came all the way out to the gate and whispered in the lady's ear. And the lady said, would passenger Kay Thompson please report? well, that's me. And so I get up and I come. She goes, are you Thompson? I said, yeah. Remember, this is prior to September 11th. She said, are you Thompson? I said, yeah. She goes, here, you're on the flight. I'm like, well, how did this happen? She said, you just got to hurry. And so I hurried and I ran, and the lady was right there, walked me down the walkway, and I get on the plane, and I'm the last one. As soon as I get in, they begin to shut the door. I'm looking at where I'm supposed to go, and the flight attendant goes, are you Thompson? I said, yeah. She goes, you're right here, first class. First seat in first class. It's the coolest thing ever. Like, they shut the little thing, like they're bringing me cookies, there are slippers, there are newspapers, right? It's like a whole different world up there. And the guy next to me was not very happy. Business suit, newspaper. I sat down and he just kind of like gruffed at me, right? And this is the most amazing thing ever. We get up in the air. I'm as happy as can be. And he's over there, and he finally turns to me and he goes, don't fly very much? I said, no, sir, I don't. I said, I've never been in first class. I said, I don't even know what's going on. And I ran through the story about, I don't know how I'm on this plane. And he said, that does not sound right. He said, give me your ticket. So I handed him my ticket, and he looks, and he goes, well, it looks fine to me. And he handed it back to me. And at that point, I looked at it. And it said, Kyle Thompson. Well, I'm Kevin Thompson. I'm not Kyle Thompson. I was given a ticket I wasn't supposed to have. You know how good that flight was? They could have rolled back late. They could have landed me somewhere else. Everything was wonderful. Why? Because I didn't deserve any of it. But everything was perfect. Meanwhile, this guy, who had paid for everything was horrible. The same cookies they brought me, he didn't like. The same newspaper I was excited to read, he had already read. The same flight attendant who I thought was excellent, he hated her. What's the difference? He was entitled to be there. He was entitled. And because he was entitled, he hated everything. Because I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, and the gratitude I had, I loved everything. I never know what happened to Kyle Thompson that day. But Kevin Thompson made it home in time to take his wife to dinner for either her birthday or anniversary. We had a great time. I wonder tonight, do you deserve your spouse? Do you deserve her? Do you deserve him? If you do, chances are you feel entitled. And chances are everything's bad. She should be better. She should do better. Anything that's wrong with your relationship is their fault. But if you have a sense of gratitude right now, a sense of gratitude for the fact that you've been given a gift that you do not deserve, that her father handed her over to you with his blessing, that his parents at minimum agreed to the marriage and gave you their baby boy. If you have a sense of gratitude, it's not that everything is perfect, but that feeling now so overwhelms everything else that love is allowed to permeate and a friendship is allowed to be built. Gratitude changes everything. And to the extent that you are grateful for your spouse, your marriage will thrive. To the extent that you think you are entitled to your spouse, your marriage will die. If you want to improve your marriage today, become better friends. And that'll change everything. Let me pray for us. I hope you come back tomorrow. We're going to have a great time tomorrow. We're going to talk about partnership and a little bit about sex as well. Let me pray for us, and then it's over to Jay. Most gracious Heavenly Father, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for these men and women who are willing to show up into this place on a busy Friday night, on a holiday weekend, and to truly think about the important things of life. For Father, you care about us, you love us, you desire for us to have life and have it in a meaningful and abundant way. And part of that is for our relationships to thrive, to flourish. And yet, Father, for whatever reason, you have put so much of that into our hands and given us that responsibility. And so, Father, I pray that tonight that these men and women would leave here, would have a good time, would would have moments of enjoyment with one another as they talk, as they reflect on the evening. For those that have to have difficult conversations, Father, if tonight's the night, then let it be tonight. But I pray that everybody would have the courage to show back up tomorrow, even though it's going to be a busy time. It's going to be a time in which there's a lot of temptations to do other things. And yet, Father, I know that tomorrow is also extremely important as we look at these other two aspects of what a healthy marriage looks like. Until we gather back here again tomorrow, be with us, keep us safe, and let us return here. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.